Hello, my name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm rector here at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Charleston. And I am here with our four-member clergy team, as well as parishioner and vestry member Martie Adams, who is a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. And our conversation for this month will focus on how we can continue to care for ourselves as we move towards the winter. We'll also talk a little bit about trauma and what that looks like. We have just come out of a very tense and anxious week in this country around our national elections. And while that outcome looks to be now resolved, there are, of course, a lot of other reasons to be anxious as we continue with this COVID-19 pandemic. And the prediction from many doctors, certainly our own doctors here at St. Stephen's, Doctors Robert Ball and Scott Curry, that the coming winter months will likely be challenging ones for the coronavirus. And so as we move into the winter, that is going to mean that the holidays are going to look different. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the way we observe Christmas here in the church, our ability to gather with family and friends as we normally might, and this, of course, will add a whole bunch of stress and will also impact our well-being. But what I want to begin this conversation on is how we lean into the gift of community life. The scriptures invite us, the Christian witness invites us to lean into life together, life in community, even in the strange time in which we have to be physically distant. And what that also means is asking for help if we feel like we need it. There are many instances in the Bible, like in the Gospels, for instance, of people in vulnerable places crying out to Jesus for help, reaching out to Jesus. But in my experience, my personal and pastoral experience, it can be very hard to admit that we need help. But we as your clergy team want to encourage you to be unafraid to do that. And so the first question I have for our clergy is to reflect upon the importance of that in their own life, perhaps to reflect on a moment when our clergy have needed help and asked for it, and what the gift of that was for them. And so I'll start with Courtney. Would you like to share a little bit on that question?
Sure. I first would just like to say this has been a period in which we have needed help, as we have had our 3 children home with COVID-19. And just to let folks know, all of the children are doing well. Adam and I continue to test negative, and are grateful that we have experienced mild symptoms, though by the time we come out of quarantine, I realize that we will have been home for over 6 weeks. And so it really has been an interesting and challenging time. But and I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has reached out to us and has supported us through prayer, through meals, through cards, phone calls. Just thank you for all the love and support. But just briefly, I am a type A personality who likes to control as much as possible. And I really had to learn how to ask for help after my mother's cancer diagnosis in 2016. Aubrey was 5 weeks old. Malcolm was 2.5. My father my mother had been my father's primary caregiver. And so I found myself with 2 young children. Adam was a rector at a church in North Carolina. I had a part-time job. And it became very quickly that clear very quickly that we could not do this on our own. And so it was reaching out to our communities through the Caring Bridge website, where we were able to let our needs be known. And what was most apparent to me during that time was there was one parishioner in North Carolina who would not call to see what we would need, but she would simply drop something off at our back door, and I would find it. And I didn't even know that I had needed what she had brought until it was there. And so it was that learning of, I need help, and I couldn't even verbalize what I needed. And so now, in hindsight, it is a learning for me to say what it is that we need, whether that's help with the children, whether that's food, whether that's a listening ear. But it really took a period of just such intense, overwhelming life changes that I recognized the importance of leaning into the Christian community, leaning into our neighbors. And it was a life-changing moment for so many reasons.
How about you, Laura?
Thanks, Adam. So I'm thinking about a moment in seminary. I did a low residency seminary program where your MDiv is spread out over 4 years. And in my case, it involved going out to California for 2-week intensive periods. And so I'm thinking about my first intensive in the summer of 2016. I think it was a Wednesday of the first week. And just so you know the schedule, it was prayer, morning prayer, noonday Eucharist, evening prayer, 4 hours of biblical Hebrew in the morning, and then 4 hours of another class in the afternoon, and then usually formation of some kind after supper. So it was intensive, as it was intended to be. And you know, the time change, and I'm just starting seminary and trying to figure out what I knew I was called, but what does that mean? And trying to learn, Hebrew. And so I remember I would call my then boyfriend, now husband, in the mornings because of the time change. And I remember this particular morning, his dog of over 10 years had died. And he was very upset. And I was feeling very upset because I could not be there. And it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. All the emotions that kind of came tumbling out that I had been reckoning with over the course of that week. And this is, 7 o'clock in the morning, right before morning prayer. So I love what you said, Courtney, about staying in control. I was like, I'm in seminary. I'm going to hold it together. I don't really know these people. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do morning prayer. And we hit the first psalm, and I just started bawling in front of God and everybody, professors, other students, and they barely know me. And I remember my friend Jude, who is now a priest in the Diocese of Los Angeles, actually got up from where she was sitting and came and sat by me. And the whole time she just like prayed in my ear. And like I couldn't even speak. I was so emotional. And then after that, the Dr. Ruth Myers, who is a professor at CDSP and also a big deal in the liturgics community, pulled me into her office, and we talked for, a good while about, what I was feeling and how I was going to be able to manage this. Had to go into my Hebrew class late, was a little anxious about how that professor was going to react. And I just experienced grace upon grace upon grace from my colleagues and from teachers, and came to realize as I got to know this community is that I might have been the first to kind of crack and break down, but everybody had that moment at some point. And it was a beautiful lesson for me in how I could be held when I needed it in that moment. And then knowing that I could also be there to hold that space for others when they needed it. And that to me is really the essence of what it means to live in Christian community. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Greg?
Well, the experience where I really needed community happened within our family at St. Stephen's. I think as many of you know, my wife about 9.5 years ago tragically passed away. And I remember the feeling of the same time being totally just ripped open through tragedy. At the same time, my body and mind and soul was totally shutting down at the same time, just trying to protect myself. And it was through family and all the caring friends of St. Stephen's that people just began to appear in my life. Just coming, not calling, just coming. They took a risk to walk into an uncertain moment of my life. And I can't tell you what anybody said. I can't tell you what anybody brought. I can just tell you that they were there. And that so fits with the teachings of Jesus. Jesus doesn't talk about you as an individual. He talks about us as a loving community. And it was just through presence. Through the people that came, I felt the presence of God. And it began over a long, long period of time, like anyone who experiences grief, of finding new meaning, finding ways to make sense out of something that was just indescribable. So I know that being present is the best way to share with another, just being with them.
Thank you, Greg. I this week am very reflective about my mother, because my mother died 20 years ago, November the 11th, and that was certainly a moment when I needed every resource available, and when chaplains and friends in college really rallied around me. But another experience in my life that has come to mind during this conversation was when I lived in Brazil in my mid-20s. And of course, when I was there, I was almost entirely reliant on other people. That was a real spiritual learning for me, coming in as an American, wanting to help people and fix things and do things. But I didn't speak a word of Portuguese the day I arrived in Sao Paulo. And so I had to rely entirely on the community where I was placed, not only to learn the language, but to do basic things that I had taken for granted in the United States. And I can remember one time I was serving in a slum just outside of Rio de Janeiro. I got sick, and the sexton, the caretaker of the church, and his wife took me to their home, which was in another slum outside Rio, and sort of nursed me back to health. And that to me was a real symbolic reminder of the power of Christian community, and the way that the community that I served there really wrapped me in their arms. But it was hard for me during that year because I lost the sense of independence and autonomy that I had come to take for granted in the United States. And there were moments when that really frustrated me. But in hindsight, there was so much beauty, and much of the growth I experienced came through the willingness to let go and allow other people in to help and to be a part of my life, and to help and to make me a part of their life as well. And so I was really grateful for that. Martie, I want to talk to you about trauma, but I wonder if there's a moment that comes to mind for you when you needed the help of others or needed to ask for help to get through.
Yes. Many years ago, I guess almost 20 years ago now, when I realized that my first marriage was irreparably damaged. I had a therapist, and I was seeing the therapist, and I'd gone to church and said, I took my vows so seriously, and I went to the priest and said, is it okay for me to leave my husband? And of course, he didn't tell me yes or no. He just put that back out there to me. But at one point, I realized that I was depressed. I mean, I was not getting anything done during the day. Things that used to give me pleasure did not give me pleasure. I would watch a movie that used to just make me laugh out loud, and I would barely crack a smile. And so I said to my therapist, I think I need medication. And she said, are you wondering why I didn't suggest that? But anyway, I went on medication for a brief time because that was just so devastating to me. I had valued family and the intact family. And as I said, I took my vows so seriously. And I did come through it. People did rally around me. But it's interesting because often for me, when I am most devastated, I forget to ask God for help. And so I need people to remind me. I do other things, but I forget. I sometimes just, I don't know, maybe I feel abandoned by God. I've never thought about that before, but I forget to ask for help. And yet it's so reassuring, turning to Bible prayers and promises. I sometimes recommend this little book to clients, or to do what Mike Schuen's reading was a few weeks ago, Philippians, to focus on whatever is true and honorable and beautiful and good. And that helps me a lot to remember that in the midst of what's very hard, there is beauty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think from a spiritual standpoint, as some mentors have reminded me in the past, the willingness to ask for help from a spiritual standpoint is a reminder that we are not God.
Yes.
that we ultimately are not in total control, which can be hard to admit to ourselves. But there's a lot of grace in the willingness to make that admission. I wonder, Martie, if you can talk a little bit about trauma, about how we recognize that in ourselves and in our loved ones, and how these things can be an indication that maybe it's time for us to reach out for help.
Yeah. Well, it's another time that I was depressed was when I was taking medication after I'd had my lumpectomy for breast cancer and radiation, and they put me on a medication that the side effect for me was terrible depression. And I realized again that, we had a lovely summer vacation coming up, and I just had no interest in going on it. And we had a meal with friends, and I came home and I said to David, I didn't enjoy that at all. And he said, I know, I had to carry the conversation because usually I'm the total chatterbox and have to remind myself to give other people space to talk. But so I luckily could just go off that medicine and feel better. But yeah, so sometimes the way that we know that we're in trouble is by paying attention to our bodies. We're either not sleeping or sleeping too much. we have no appetite, or we're eating too much, we're feel sluggish, or we're jittery and irritable. So sometimes we can have the awareness to see that in ourselves, and other times we have to hope that someone close to us can tell us in a loving way that we seem irritable, or that we're sleeping a lot, or that we're eating all the time, or having more glasses of wine than we usually have. So I think, again, it's part of being in community. But, one of the things about trauma is that it can be, a sudden thing like a car accident, or it can just be an accumulation of stressors that that we experience as trauma. And one of the things about trauma is that it breaks up the narrative. So we, as Greg talked about freezing, we can just shut down and not be able to function. Or some of us fight when we're feel like there's a threat. Some of us, kind of disappear. Others of us try to please other people instead of, being able to have an authentic response. But I think all of us are so stressed with COVID and the uncertainty. So Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability, and she defines vulnerability as risk, uncertainty, or emotional exposure. And of course, we're all experiencing at least two of those, sometimes three right now. The uncertainty of this virus, the risks that we all take, even if we're doing everything that's recommended, we can protect ourselves. We can do everything we can to minimize the risk, but we can't eliminate the risk. And then there's just all the emotions that we feel during these times. So yeah, I think that self-care is so important. So creating structure in our lives, orienting to beauty, whether that's being in nature, or having fresh flowers in your home, or turning to things that bring peace, can be so helpful. Beautiful music, that's one of the things, Adam, I give you all the credit for making me weep in church, but I realize it's really also Wayne Helmsley's music just is so moving and lovely for me. So those are some of the things that I think can be helpful.
Well,
Have I answered your question?
Yeah, something that you said, I think sometimes in the church we often don't spend enough time talking about mental health, and I certainly, in my experience, have not heard a lot of conversation in the church about medication, and sometimes those moments when we might want to think about doing that. And I wonder, do you have thoughts on how people should think about that, or when they might want to think about considering the help that medication can provide?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, when I was going through the breakup of my marriage, I was talking to a friend of mine who was a therapist, and I said, I said, I can't believe I'm thinking of going on mind-altering medication. And she said, well, why don't you think of it as mind healing medication? And she said, if you had a broken arm, you would get a cast, wouldn't you? And that was so helpful for me to hear, because again, that sense that I don't need help. I grew up in a military family, so it's like, we don't need help, we help other people. So yeah, I think that if you just feel overwhelmed, that it's very smart to talk to a therapist or your primary care doctor and just say, here's what's going on for me. Because for me, I needed the medication just for a short time. And one of the things that somebody once said to me that I really identified with was, if you need an antidepressant and you start taking it, or maybe it's anti-anxiety medication and you start taking it, after a while, it's like you're looking at a color television again, where for a while you've been looking at black and white. And I think that's what it is. It just opens up the world so that we can feel hopeful again, because that's the thing about depression, we feel hopeless. And sometimes then I feel guilty for feeling hopeless because the Bible tells us not to despair, but sometimes we do.
Courtney, do you want to say something on this?
Sure. I mentioned a little bit in August that I had been struggling with anxiety. And I, to your point, Marty, I grew up, my dad was a therapist, and I grew up being told that everything should be able to be resolved with therapy, that medication was just not necessary. And therapy can be perfect for some individuals, but sometimes it may need to be paired with something else.
Yeah.
And I think for many years I felt shame, or I felt like, is this going to have to be something that I take for the rest of my life? What does this say about me? And I will say that for the first time, I have found a doctor. I mean, I work with a therapist who's in Asheville, and so we FaceTime, but I have found a primary care doctor who for the first time has really worked with me and helped me understand, that this can be for short periods. I was experiencing anxiety attacks, panic attacks in June, and it has made all the difference. As we are now quarantined for 6 weeks, I don't know physically how I would have responded if I had not taken some action ahead of time. And I think that's part of why we're wanting to have this conversation, because as we enter into the colder weather and longer days of darkness, as the holidays come, it's trying to think about our feet, how are we doing right now? Let's check in with ourselves. And are there conversations that we need to have, whether with a therapist or our family doctor or our friends and loved ones, to say, how might I prepare for what is still to come in the coming months? So thank you.
Yeah. And that's, what you're saying is also important, because Courtney, I think the dark winter months are hard for many of us, but some people really clinically have seasonal affect disorder. So combining the pandemic and the uncertainty there with seasonal affect disorder, it's sort of like a step theory. Maybe you could handle the first step, pandemic, or seasonal affect disorder, if that's all there were. But if they're two together, you're on the second step. And that might be when you need to get a light box or go outside when it's light and be in the sunlight, or seek medication. So it's really paying attention and tuning into ourselves and just being aware if we're irritable or have the blues more than we normally experience. I'm usually very chipper. So when I'm down for a couple days, I say, okay, what do I need to do here?
It's funny, Marty, when you mention a lot of these symptoms, my first thought is, gosh, I would think most of the country is experiencing this right now, given how long this is stretched out. And Courtney mentioned our first clergy conversation, which was right before you started, Laura. So it was Greg, Courtney, and I sort of reflecting on, at that time, 6 months in this pandemic. And, when the pandemic started, and I've heard other clergy say this, I think the instinct was to sort of spring into action and say, okay, we're going to get through this. And we started doing all these things, and then you hit month number 2 and month number 3, and it's like, wow, I think a lot of people started to hit a wall in one way or another. And I think Courtney's point is right about how do we check in with ourselves right now, and also plan and prepare for the coming months, and how do we spiritually take care of ourselves. And I wonder, for our clergy, if you have reflections on that as we move towards these darker times of the year. Laura, do you have thoughts on that?
I'm not somebody who's been formally diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder, but I know that, and it probably is nothing clinical, but I do know that my mood does shift when the days start to get shorter. So this is something that I've never thought about this during a pandemic before, but it's something that I've certainly considered for myself in terms of how to manage mood and also to stay really connected to God when days are literally getting darker. Your suggestion of a light box is amazing. A light box really made a marked improvement for me. I would have one in my office at the university, and it was just amazing in terms of just how much better it made me feel. So that's, there's some external things like that, having that good support network, friends that I could talk to and share conversation with, not just kind of conversation about vulnerable things, but just having lighthearted conversation, being able to connect, about silly stuff really did make a difference. And then, last but certainly not least, the most important component of this for me is making sure that I'm staying connected to God through my spiritual practices. And for me, the practice that has been so helpful has been centering prayer. I really truly believe that God's first language is silence. And so being able to spend time in silence with God every day, oftentimes during the prayer, I don't feel any consolation. I certainly don't see Jesus at the right hand of the Father or hear any voices or anything like that. But what I do notice is that when I am faithful to the prayer, I see the fruits of the prayer in my daily life, in terms of my resilience, in terms of my patience, in terms of my own inner peace. So as the seasons change, I always make sure to say, okay, no matter what else on my schedule is happening, I need to make sure that I'm having that time to pray and to connect with God, because I know that's really what's going to get me through the hard times. Thank you.
I've noticed, Laura, when you offer the family faith activities, that you begin each time inviting listeners to take some deep breaths with you. And I have a therapist who I see who's also a very spiritual person, who is a great believer in the power of deep, slow breathing, and has told me many times that in and of itself has healing properties to it. It also makes me think, as much as I love our prayer book tradition in the Episcopal Church, how many times I've talked with colleagues that oftentimes we can get overly wordy in the Episcopal Church and do not make enough time to be still and mindful of the presence of God, as the 46th Psalm invites us to, and so slowing down and taking deep breaths, because I think many of us are running around breathing very shallowly, and only when you slow down and take a deep breath do you realize, oh gosh, I've really not been breathing, have I? And that in itself can be a very grounding thing. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, I just to reflect off of what you both have just said, I do that daily. I breathe in the love of God and just let him hold my anxieties, and then I breathe them out. It's very cleansing. I really feel we're all living in this world of this accumulation of anxieties. These situations are just layering on top of each other. And so the fact is, we're all weighed down, just with the world's problems, things that we can't necessarily control, let alone what's going on in our own personal life and how we're trying to deal with all this. And Charleston is filled with many beautiful parks, but the most beautiful park I feel in Charleston is Hampton Park. It's filled with beautiful flowers and trees, and walking paths. And on Saturday, I was sitting there with another person, and we were talking about some of this. And we talked about, you can walk through Hampton Park. Just, you can walk through it, you know, have good, brisk walk, feels pretty good. Or you can walk through it in a different way and mindfully listen to the birds in the trees, observe the beauty of all the flowers, feel the breeze, listen to the children singing, see the birds coming in and landing on the pond, and the water fountain. And so it was a very instructional of, we can choose the way we want to walk through these next several months. And you know, there's great, again, great instruction from Jesus in terms of what suffering does in our lives. We can choose to, through suffering, open ourselves up and receive new life. You know, the way we walk through Hampton Park, or the way we decide to maybe enter into other people's suffering and be present. Or maybe the way we want to enter into our own suffering and befriend it. There's something profound about suffering. And to me, it will always lead us into a new life, into new goodness, into knowing something about ourselves or the world around us that can profoundly change our lives. And so I think I am trying now on a daily basis, and certainly going to be very as mindful as I can, because I feel weighed down, to try and be much more intentional of finding the breeze in the trees, the beautiful flowers in the garden.
That's great, Greg. Thank you. Courtney?
Oh, Greg, I look forward to the day of walking through Hampton Park with you and sitting on a bench. That sounds so fabulous.
Me too.
Whereas my reality is I'm trying to not step on Legos in the living room. And I think that's part of this time, right? Is that we're all in such different places, and it's, I will say for me right now, where I find that I'm so focused is on those things that I can control in my life. And so, for example, trying to say, okay, I'm going to go out and get my flu shot and check that off my list. Or for me, it's something I can do that feels productive, you know. So the kitchen counter has looked like a disaster for 3 days. May I take this 45 minutes and just clear this section? And now the rest of the house may be a total disaster, but there might be one area that I could feel within myself of, okay, we were able to manage this. And so it's very much trying to find the places that I can do something. And then maybe I do need to go take a nap or lay down, or maybe I'm, you know, having up and down moods. But if some point during the day I can find the period to do something productive. And often in those periods of either cleaning or folding laundry or cooking, it's also finding time to spend with God and to talk to God in these moments of whether it's, and God can handle it all, right? So whether it's complaining about having to do another load of laundry that's never ending, or just trying to be present to fully the act that I am in, it is finding those moments, as Adam said, to breathe, and as Laura and Greg said, to have quiet. And I will also say, because the TV is on more in our house, it's also putting on my little earpods and putting on great music, whether that's music to dance to or peaceful music. At least I don't have to listen to the Paw Patrol theme song another time, so it's just trying to find ways to find quiet. And I think for all of us, while I hope folks won't find themselves in quarantine, we're all having to adjust our lives in such drastic ways. It's trying to find small practices to hold on to that we enjoy. And Legos are another thing I'm enjoying during this time. So, it's trying to find beauty, trying to find some quiet, and always just continuing to give thanks.
Martie, do you have, are there things you're thinking about as we move into the winter months about how you prepare yourself or take care of yourself?
Yes. One of the things is that I really have come to a place of acceptance about how things are. And I'm not thinking in terms of when will this be over, next week, a month from now. I'm just living in today. And then also, in addition to breathing, to another thing that I do to ground myself and to come back to the present moment is something a client taught me, actually, which is I take several deep breaths and then I look at 5 different things and really focus on them: a painting, a lamp, an orchid, a chair, the rug. And then I feel 4 different things. So the smooth wood of the table, I usually feel my hair as something, the nubby upholstery. And then I listen for 3 things, and I smell 2 things, and I taste 1 thing. And that just grounds me in my senses. So that's something that I do for a moment. But I think that it's really about, coming to a place of acceptance, and then, asking for help as we need it. And, I enjoy finding Bible verses that speak to me. So 2 Timothy, the first chapter, verse 7, the King James Bible is, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And I love that, because fear is a place that I can go, and fear is a place that all of us, I think, can go. So,
And I think for me, Courtney mentioned the challenges of parenthood in this time, and I must say that it is a very challenging thing to parent small children in the middle of a global pandemic. And I think that it's important that all of us be gentle with ourselves and with other people. And part of asking for help is acknowledging that imperfection is okay, and that whatever standards you've come up for yourself in your head do not necessarily have to be met in this unprecedented moment that we find ourselves in. But this moment has certainly reminded me how much I am an introvert and how much I need time to myself, even if that's a brief walk. But as Courtney said, taking time, and others, for silence, I think is so very important. And it's for me a great consolation in this moment to be part of a Christian community, to be part of a praying community, be part of a community where I am mindful that there are people interceding for me just as I am for those at St. Stephen's as well, and that gives me a great deal of strength. I do want to say to all of you as we come towards the end of our time, and I'll allow others to jump in if you have thoughts on this, that as your rector, I really want to encourage you to be in touch with us if there are ways that we can be supportive of you, or if there are other people that you know of who might need support. This happens in every congregation, but sometimes we clergy are the last people to get contacted when there is an emergency or somebody ends up in the hospital or there is some kind of pastoral need. Sometimes people don't think to contact us, but we're here for you. And even in this strange time when perhaps we can't physically visit the way we normally might have, please do be in touch and let us know if there are ways that we can be helpful to you beyond our prayers or even with our prayers. If there are things, I have had people simply reach out to me, send me a text just to ask for my prayers. Just be in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And certainly know that we're all trying to reach out as we are able. Please do check in with one another. And I know many of you are doing that. Pick up the phone, send an email, send a text. Those may be in your circle here at St. Stephen's or beyond. I think that's so important. And then, of course, we do have this meal program that has gotten started. That has gotten started thanks to Courtney's initiative. And I wonder, Courtney, if you just want to say anything about that meal program as we continue to implement it.
Sure. This is just one way that we are exploring to have meals available. If you would like to participate, you can either cook and bring meals to the office for others, or if you are simply tired of cooking or would like something that has already been made, you are welcome to coordinate with me to come and get a meal out of the refrigerator or freezer. So this is not based on need, though we are aware and are delivering to those who may not be able to get to the church. But if you simply are tired in spirit, and if this would be of help or support to you, please let me know. Or if you know someone who could benefit from this, we are grateful to the cooks. You do not have to cook to participate. You can cook. You can simply come get a meal. You can do both. It is just meant to be an open meal for whoever would like to participate.
Thank you, Courtney. And while we are still in a place where we do not feel it is safe to gather for worship in the church, there have been some opportunities that we've been thinking about to gather people physically outdoors. Greg and Laura, as an example, recently led a prayer vigil as the polls closed on election day that had a nice attendance to it. And Laura, I know you're planning for an Advent wreath making workshop for families. And is there going to be an opportunity for others who might want to make a wreath if they'd like to come and be part of that?
Sure, anyone is welcome to make a wreath, whether you are a family of one or two or families with children. You are more than welcome to come and make a wreath. We will also, we're thinking too that if you are excited about that, about doing that practice in your home during Advent, but you feel a little nervous still about gathering around other people, even though we are masked and we socially distance, understandable if that's just where you're at, where you feel a little nervous about that. We can do wreaths to go and make a little package for you, so that, which would have a mold and candles and greens, so that you could have that, you could still make one on your own and still have candles to light as a family.
Thank you. So know we're thinking, friends, about opportunities for us to safely gather programmatically or for short prayer services outdoors. Stay tuned for more information on that, and know that your clergy team will be back next month for another clergy conversation. But we're grateful that you've listened in, and grateful to have Martie Adams join us for this conversation. Thank you so much, Martie.
Thank you.
Hope you all continue to stay safe and be well, and make sure you're wearing your mask and social distancing out there, and know of our prayers for you. Please do pray for us. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.